Hey everybody, this is Carlos. I am the CEO at Product School. Today I'm here with the CEO at Loops, Tom Laufer. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Tom, I look forward to having a deep dive on product analytics. But before that, I want to learn more about your passion for ping pong and other racket sports, given that I'm a huge tennis lover.
Nice start there. Yeah. So I used to be a professional ping pong player. It was kind of like one of the best in my country there. And then at a certain point, I moved to actually tennis there, and then I stopped. It was 20 years ago, and I just like a few months ago actually got back to this, and I'm loving it. I play at least once a week. I'm being very competitive, but I think it's an interesting kind of like, people say that we live in an interesting era from an LLM perspective, from GenAI, but also from, I say, tennis perspective, because now I get the chance to try paddle, which wasn't a thing when I was a teenager, and pickleball, which all my friends talk about right now. So I'm at the moment where I'm kind of in exploration mode, and I need to choose my next gig there.
You know what's funny? I also play tennis, and there's so many CEOs and executives I play with, and of course we're all competitive. And I think there is some correlation there between work and sports. And even though of course we're all past our prime, there is something about just staying out there and like trying to do our best.
That's true. Every time we play at the company, it feels to me that like my co-founder, my CTO, and myself, we're being over, dramatic around like the are likely to win, and the willingness to do certain things to win. So yeah, I can relate to this.
Well, let's talk about product analytics. I mean, your current company Loops is in that space, but I want to learn more about why you started. I see that you spent a ton of time doing growth and analytics at Google.
Yeah. In a way, loops is I think results of my was own personal problem. So I was leading growth analytics for Google there, was basically in charge of driving growth through Google search, YouTube, Gmail, Maps, photos, and so on. And I was really frustrated because we had so many dashboards and graphs and lines that go up and down. They look great on monitors, and so on those weekly meetings and so on. But we're not actually actionable insights. Like if you think about the product strategy, it was very hard for us to take all those data points, all those graphs, and translate them into actions of what did we learn from that. And I think that was a trigger for me to start Loops. Eventually what Loops does is it's an analytics platform that surface insights in there, like leveraging GenAI and Causal AI to surface the biggest insights that you have to improve the KPIs in an actionable way that helps you improve your product KPIs like conversion, retention, engagement, monetization, and so on. We started before the GenAI kind of revolution, but I think this technology actually accelerates right now this. I think the basic notion that eventually technology should help product people understand where to focus on in a different way than the way we used to actually make data accessible, right? So if you think about it, Carlos, from the moment of the internet era, where like the way we think about making data-driven decisions is that let's make data available via those dashboards, and they will figure it out, like the product people. And I think with the amount of data that is currently being collected, it doesn't work anymore. And I think technology should help you focus on the biggest insights and opportunities to improve your KPIs. And Loops is in the kind of like is part of this revolution, and definitely what we're seeing out there in the market right now will just accelerate that.
And I want to point out a few of my challenges as an executive trying to make the most out of data and see, how you are thinking about it and other people can solve them. Like first of all, dashboards. I hate them, right? Like there are always people that are building dashboards and the expectation is that someone else, an executive, will read the dashboard. But that's not always the case. So like what is a better way of like truly making sure that the right person understands what is happening so they can do something about it?
I 100% agree with you. I think what we're seeing, and you're no different there, Carlos. You're getting those dashboards, your daily, your weekly dashboards of full of all this, right? You need to scroll down and see those dashboards, and you kind of, I don't have time to go and explore there. Give me the bottom line. And I think two kind of like, I think ways of interaction that we're currently seeing, an alternative for what you just described, Carlos, is First, pushing to you kind of like a short summary of what you need to know today, where you stand versus your goals, why are you not meeting your goals, what KPIs are actually going down, what are the reasons for that, and what are the things you can do about that to actually kind of like to meet your goals. So this is kind of like a summary. We, for example, at Loop, we push this to your micros, like your Slack or your Teams, in kind of a daily, weekly, monthly summary of what you need to know. In a very short one, if you want, you can go deeper. But this is just one format, and the other one is what we are starting to see. I think that's still early days. There is ability to ask questions in kind of like free language. Think about that as the your JetGPT data kind of scientist. I'm sure you don't want to go, Carlos, via all those dashboards, but you have, tell me, like, you might have a questions of what you need to know, and you want to get only this type of insight. So this is another like interaction that we are seeing to get today with the Gen AI revolution. Another like interaction way you can think of as an alternative for the dashboards that I actually think in a year or two will be not very relevant for the way, or will play a smaller part in the way companies make data-driven decisions.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big one too. I come from a technical background. I learned how to use CQL, but I recognize how much of a limitation that is for a lot of people. And even if you know how to use CQL, it still requires a lot of practice to get to the right insight. So finding ways to just speak to the data like you would speak to a human, I think is huge. It is happening, but there has to happen more at a mainstream level. I still see a lot of data teams kind of guarding the data. And if you want to ask for something, you first need to have a certain level of like seniority. And number two, sometimes the data team will just spit out another dashboard. And like to me, the biggest frustration is I don't need more dashboards. I need someone to interpret the dashboard for me. And not only that, but suggest what they think we should do about it.
Yeah, Carlos, I share your frustration here, I guess, and I'll say that in a kind of maybe, let's say, a bit controversial way. But eventually, most of you're being a bit frustrated about the fact that you ask a question and maybe you get the dashboards, but you want to get the insight from your analytics colleagues or counterparts. And I think this is a big part of the lion's share of the market that we're currently seeing, in a sense that we're seeing analytics teams supporting, for example, their product with like being kind of a dashboard builder, service provider. You ask a question, they build a dashboard, they push that to you, and they tell you go figure. That's not what world class kind of like analytics teams are at the moment doing. So there is a group of analytics team where we are seeing that they're able to generate. By the way, not even based, Carlos, on based on your question. So there it could be one case where you ask a question and they bring you, Carlos, okay, that's the answer. This is what I think you need to do. But the best one is like, I know you don't ask about that, Carlos, but I know that's your KPI. So I went through the data, and these are the three insights that I think you should be aware of. These are the four things that I think you should be doing, even without your questions. And that's what separates, I think, good kind of like product analytics relationship versus like an average one, which is mostly based on you ask a questions, you get a dashboards, and you move on.
I love that. And I also know that it's possible. There are always some people who are especially proactive who get ahead of the game by just kind of giving answers of questions that haven't even been asked. So I now want to learn from your own experience, especially now building loops, like how are you leveraging technology to facilitate this type of behavior for analytics teams?
How much? Sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Yeah, so I want to learn more about how you are leveraging technology. You mentioned GenAI, Causal Inference,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
other ways of facilitating that analytics teams can follow that type of behavior instead of being kind of reactive to wait for someone to ask them to build another dashboard.
Exactly. So yeah, we you mentioned, I think, some of the core technology that we're using. We're using causal inference model, which actually enables you to see insights about your real growth levers to improve your KPI. So if I'm kind of like, if you think about it, a product manager is in, let's say, a B2C company, and I need to improve my let's say weekly active users or any other KPIs. I'm just trying to search for those the biggest growth levers to improve my KPIs, being specific features, user experiences, and so on. Basically, we're leveraging kind of an NI model that basically what it does, it identify what are the biggest kind of causal drivers to your KPI. So you know always how people say that correlation is not causation, because There is a huge difference there in terms of what really affects their KPIs. And we are kind of running, thinking about it like millions of simulation of A/B tests without A/B tests to tell you where are the biggest drivers, the biggest opportunities to improve those KPIs. That leads to very robust insights. As a result, more than 80% of the experiment that companies do based on our insights are actually successful. Don't know about you, but when during my Google days, I had 20% success rate on experimentation. So if we're getting to 80%, I think that's a good sign there. And the second part is really the Gen AI piece, which actually kind of take all this data and enables you first to ask questions in free language, but also take all this data and summarize to you in a very kind of like digestible way that actually speaks your language, speaks your it speaks your KPIs, it speaks your top kind of like the way you think about segmentations, the way you think about user journeys and features and so on. It's like Carlos, it's the opposite of this frustration that you mentioned earlier. It's the best data scientist that speaks your language, that knows what you what important for you, and actually like proactively surface those insights. So basically, we enable you, like it enables you to get summaries of the biggest insights that you have, and actually talk to your data, because maybe you get an insights and then you have another deep dive question. Okay, what happened with this type of segmentation and so on. So it's kind of it triggers kind of a brainstorming discussion that actually leads to really robust and actionable insights at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
And the GenAI piece is something that I'm starting to see, and I think that's awesome because, as you said, I now can rely on something that can interpret the data for me. I can even continue the conversation. I can have that conversation in a human language, and ultimately, that's accelerating my decision-making process. Now, the first piece that you mentioned sounds really fascinating and kind of new to me. You talked about being able to simulate A/B tests without actually running them. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah. This is like, let's take a great one example there. You just launch a feature, and you basically, you were not able to run an A/B test for that for various reasons. You didn't have the time, the traffic, the resources, and so on. Basically, what we do today is we kind of simulate A/B tests. We look at users with similar intent, similar attributes, and so on, and we artificially create treatment and control in a way that kind of like mimic the behavior of an A/B test to tell you kind of what's the real effect on the KPIs. This is today, for example, Carlos, is a good alternative in case you couldn't do an A/B test, to the extent that is like we are training this against real A/B tests. So we are on 90 something percent accuracy rate versus A/B tests. What it means basically is that you are able to understand many of your best kind of drivers to improving KPIs, and also measure the impact of the launches that you had without A/B tests in a very robust kind of accuracy, which is really game changer. By the way, also for many cases where just A/B test is offensive kind of concept and slows you down. Um, and I have to say also for the audience here, it's not like at Loops we invented the wheel. Yes, we tailor that to our like the product and growth board, but in the last 2 years, 3 years, companies like Uber, LinkedIn, Netflix, obviously Google, Microsoft, and so on, all publish articles about how they use causal models to make product decisions, to identify the biggest drivers to improve the KPIs, and also to measure the impact of their launches in an environment where sometimes A/B test is just not feasible.
Yeah, that's another good point. Like a lot of the large tech companies have dedicated growth teams or analytics teams that are able to experiment much faster, and they also build their own technology and they have their own data sets. But for the 99% of the world, that is just not feasible. And obviously, that's where SaaS plays a key role in allowing you to get this type of capability without building from scratch. However, A/B testing is always being expensive. You mentioned that because sometimes those companies do not have the right volume of data, or they don't have the right expertise to run this properly, or they don't even have the right culture to feel really comfortable running that many levels of experiments at the same time. So that can be a huge unlock because technically you do not need any of that in order to test multiple things.
Yeah, exactly. And let's even make it even more concrete. If you think about the average, Carlos, B2B company, in many cases, most of them just don't have enough traffic. They will never have statistically speaking, enough traffic to run A/B tests. So the alternative is what is like launch, maybe get some qualitative user feedback and move on. Maybe look at what they sometimes do is look at feature adoption over time. But that's a vanity metrics, right? You launch a feature, you put your most expensive resources, your R&D on this feature, and you want to see that actually it contributes to the KPIs that you care about, be it revenue, conversion, retention, NPS, whatever you have there. And this is kind of like those Causal models are a great alternative in case you couldn't do those A/B tests at the end of the day. Because at the moment we are seeing B2B companies just running blind, launch a feature and just move on without really understanding our ability to really quantify the effect it has on this KPIs. And I find it like really a crazy word right now. Because Carlos, in marketing, everyone talks about ROAS, what return on ad spend. Like I put X amount of money and what I'm getting in return. But when it comes to product and R&D, sometimes, and especially in environments that is the culture, that the analytics culture is not mature enough, you launch a feature. That's your effort that you put, your R&D, but you're not being asked about the ROAS around those things, like how it affect, what was the return on the investment that they had. And I think this is what also differentiates with like very good, I think, product analytics team versus, let's say, average or mediocre kind of analytics team that just they launch a feature and just move on. And the example that I gave with the causal inference is just one of those, I think, methods that I'm seeing to measure that. But it's also there is a culture kind of shift that needs to happen among those organizations, um, precisely.
Let's talk about those type of success metrics. Look, we do a lot of work with large enterprises, and that gets even worse as the companies get bigger. It's just much harder to measure the actual impact of anything that is being launched because something is already in motion, and there are always ways to justify why someone is busy, right? You can talk about the velocity, you can talk about whatever. So, like in your case, how do you find these type of ways to be more specific and honest to the team to see when something is successful and needs to continue being there versus maybe roll it back?
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned Carousel again, like maybe like a very interesting, I would say, principle that we're seeing among like very good kind of product analytics team versus the average part, and it's the ability to look at like the impact of those things and understand the effect it has on the KPIs, and take actions accordingly. Because let's first kind of put the first assumption here in place. Most of the launches fail. Most of the kind of like product launches are failing, and as a result, we need to kind of like iterate and see what we need to do next in order to improve our KPI. So I think when it comes to enterprise, first, you're right, it's a very noisy environment. It's a very like so many things happen at the same time. But eventually, when the best companies that we are seeing out there, when they come to the, let's say, to the weekly business review or to the monthly business review, they go over, launch by launch, change by change, and they leverage all those either causal models that I mentioned or A/B tests and so forth, like very robust models, including, by the way, what we call automated root cause analysis, which is a way to identify why KPIs are moving down by looking at all the potential reasons. And they come for this meeting and understand, they go over like, launch by launch and are like going deeper into the effect it has on the KPI and make the unpopular decisions of either sometimes unship certain things because it didn't have the effect it has, or do another iteration on the launch that you had. I find it like really surprising sometimes that companies just kind of launch. They don't actually spend the time on actually understanding why KPIs are going down and or what was the effect on the of the launch, and just like they move on. In while at least for my experience, definitely my experience at Google as well, most of the things that we launched required few iterations until we actually saw the effect it has on the KPI. So it's a cultural kind of like shift that we are starting to see more and more companies. I have to say, people kind of follow I think the principle of the best kind of like companies in the Silicon Valley, but starting to see this, that they actually go through launch by launch with very clear attribution model of how each kind of those let's say launches that they had affected on the KPIs. And today with AI models, Carlos, they're ways to do this type of attribution, to separate, to isolate the effect that each kind of like action that you had on your KPI.
I think that is the key to having the strong enough attribution model, and hopefully using technology in a way that it can be done semi-automatically. Because I've tried to create attribution models my whole life, and they're always so tricky and they're so easy to game, and they're still not 100%. And it's okay. Like, I don't need to get to 100%, but I think a lot of people over rotate on then let's create the right attribution model. And at the same time, some things don't require 100% accuracy in order to know that they are not going in the right direction. So I think that is going to be huge. The other piece, and I want to get your thoughts on, is the right way to structure the analytics team or the product analytics team. Because I've noticed that when analytics is part of a specific product pod, they're kind of biased, right? Because they're feeling like they're justifying why what they did is right. So when I see analytics as a more independent function where they can analyze what's going on and not try to take any sides, but simply try to explain the truth, that tends to create a more productive situation. However, analytics doesn't always have decision-making power. They seem to be like the truth tellers, but then who is the actual tiebreaker?
Yeah. At the moment, what we're seeing at the market, like let's say I'm maybe simplifying, but you have kind of like an analytics team that reports to the product team or part of the product teams, and you have a central analytics team that actually kind of work with them as colleagues. As you're saying, I think when analytics team is part of the product we report them, they kind of try sometimes to satisfy them. But when you have a central analytics team, they just sometimes don't have the context that they need to be very effective. And I actually think today, and it's actually GenAI will accelerate that. The main reason why analytics kind of like project fail is because analytics team just don't have the business and product context to be able to generate insights. They just like the context of the business, how the product is growing is missing, and that's the reason why you're getting very shallow insights. So what we're seeing here today is like maybe kind of like a mixed or like an embedded approach where there is a central team together, but they actually kind of like part of their product teams, even though they don't report to them directly. They're embedded in their teams, even though they don't. There is a difference in kind of like the reporting kind of way there. But what's I think more important than ever is the culture behind this. Forget like the structure. The culture is around the ability for analytics team to stand out and actually kind of like and surface the insights that they think are important. Because right now, product teams, let's face it, again, I'm saying something that may be sometimes unpopular. Product teams sometimes torture the data to the extent that like they wanted to like eventually it will confess to everything when you torture the data, because they kind of product teams have their own hypothesis and they're kind of sometimes searching for the data that will prove their hypothesis. Where you're seeing kind of a healthy behavior between those teams. Actually, you have an analytics team that is an unbiased way looking at the data and surfacing the biggest insights, or are able to kind of prove a certain hypothesis or say that it's actually the wrong part. But it's like the structure only follows the culture from this perspective. And if you have a team, like if you have kind of like product teams that, again, they say they're data driven, but most of the decisions are based on their hypothesis that they actually want to drive, and they just play with the data to the extent that that will support their hypothesis. So that's the structure wouldn't matter.
Now I want to take us one step further in terms of what to do next, assuming that you have access to the right information. So I'm clear on how GenAI or causal inference or the root cause analysis is helping surface specific insights. And then I want to talk about how maybe some automatic ways to execute on those insights, specifically agents. Like, what are you seeing that is helping those teams accelerate not the actual decision making process, but the execution of those decisions?
Right. Yeah. First, early days there, Carlos, because I think companies, let's face it, we are not like when it comes to, let's say, analytics to actions, companies do not fully yet trust the agents to take like big decisions for them. But at least like what we are seeing today is, for example, agents that are able to take the insight that they have to design a new maybe onboarding flow with the copies that are tailored based on the insight they've seen. So, for example, like make it very concrete. We identify what are the things that could improve your retention. What's your aha moment? What needs to happen in the first few days to improve your long retention? So, yeah, like agents are able to maybe create some kind of like a to plan the copies and the user experience that would support those insights. We're seeing companies obviously like let the agents write their like emails, for example. Their disc like all their incentive, even think about campaigns like that are doing like promotion and so on. So these are some of the examples that we are seeing. I think that in a year or two, and that's my prediction, we'll actually start seeing agents actually do some of the like deeper product work. Like I got an insight, I changed some parts of the design, I changed some part of the onboarding flow. Like you probably need like gradually would need to approve it. If me as a product manager, I want to see what you just created, but I think that in a year or two, you would see actually agent do the full kind of cycle. Look at seeing the insights and design a personalized, customized new user experience based on, for example, what we identify you as interested in, like my new sports app, tennis app that I'm just kind of like that I'm just using.
I can. I'm a techno optimist and a huge believer. Like part of having these conversations with CEOs like you is for me to try to understand like where this is going and the specific use cases that are either happening now or about to happen soon. One of the things I also want to learn, Tom, is okay. Product analytics is becoming more of a crowded space. I remember when I started my company 11 years ago, and the word product analytics wasn't even a thing. Everything was analytics. And so I would love to get your take on like how do you define the market landscape of analytics and then specifically product analytics?
Yeah. Basically, what like product analytics today is in a kind of interesting. First, maybe I'll define it, and then we talk about the interesting, I think, shift that we're seeing there. But eventually, product analytics is like leveraging what we call usually behavioral analytics, so how user kind of behave in this digital experience, analyze like basically what they do in terms of the user behavior, what they clicked on, how they move from the different pages, the transaction they complete, the milestone, and so on. Use all those data eventually to create better products, to improve the KPIs that you as a product manager was hired to improve. Now, I think you're right. Like when you like, it's a kind of like let's say industry of that's like actually start to accelerating roughly around 2010 or something like that. And I think the next let's say 2 years or so is going to be very interesting because most of the product analytics kind of like solutions out there are as we talked about, they're based on what we call like the traditional visualization dashboard parts. And you said it yourself, Carlos. People got sick of like staring at those dashboards. I think this is where it becomes interesting. So we are starting to see product analytics solutions deployed, ability to ask questions instead of just staring at the dashboards. We are starting to see agent that enables you to again create maybe a new item list in e-commerce based on what the agent saw as the biggest drivers. So in the actions parts, and I actually think that the importance of the visualization part will be less and less important. I think, for example, that in a few months time or even a year or two, you most of like your engagement with analytics solutions, big part of them will be part of your Slack or your Microsoft Teams or emails, because you don't want to go into another like SaaS and stare in all those dashboards. You want to be able to get the insights that you need to in the right moments for your next, let's say, planning cycle, or for like your next weekly business review and so on. So I think this is like where it's going to be much more relevant, much more helpful than up until now. I think honestly, and I'm putting that in a very something that I heard from some of the like internal product teams from the best product analytics out there. Most of the use case right now is like, okay, how many people use my feature on a daily basis? This is like what product analytics 80%, like is what they quote that I have there. Like 80% of product analytics today is like how users are using my features, and some A/B tester. But there are lots of hidden gems. There are lots of insights at the moment hidden in your data, and with like the power of the Gen AI and also Causal AI, you'll be able to unlock that.
So as you also try to compete within that space of product analytics, and there are some companies out there that are probably bigger or funding and all of that, like how do you position your product in a way that sets you apart?
Yeah, so we actually integrate with all those solutions today, like all those Amplitude, Mixpanel of and Adobe of the world, and so on. I think where we deliver our unique selling point is the ability to proactively surface those insights versus, we call it pull versus push. In like when you look at all those dashboards, you need to pull the insights. We actually do the work for you to and push that to you to your Slack or to in like different formats that you are interested, and also really understanding, like leveraging all those causal models that I referred to earlier, understanding what are your biggest drivers, what do you need to do next. So we surface in insights with a clear size of opportunity, like these type of actions could drive 25% in your attention, and this is what you need to do in order to take action there. So it's a very different mindset than looking at, let's say, a key, like, I don't know, feature adoption over time or any other dashboards, and try to kind of figure out your own kind of hypothesis. We are actually shortening the time to value and surface kind of like a clear actionable hypothesis that enables you to focus on the biggest opportunities to improve your KPIs.
Got it. I mean, that's what I was saying that I try to do in meetings where people bring dashboards. Like try to understand what is the learning here, what are the insights, uh, why, and then what are we going to do about it. So in a way, you're trying to surface that information in a semi-automatic way.
Yeah, definitely. And but also, I think the issue, that the pitfall that you're currently referring to, Carlos, is also a cultural thing. And this is what all of us as executives should talk about and set the expectations there. Like, executives should expect their teams, their product teams, their analytics team, to start with the insights, not just kind of like share dashboards for the purpose of that. It sounds obvious today, but many of those meetings that I see at the moment, and many of those sessions end up with like nice graph of like something, I don't know, a certain KPI over time, without clear kind of like insights. Okay, what did we learn from that, and what are we doing next based on what we learned? And these are the two questions that every executive today should ask their kind of like their colleagues, their reports, because technology should like will follow. We are kind of following a demand that we are seeing in some of the industry, but I think everything starts with like executives that are like actually going to ask those two questions all the time about the basically the importance of actionable insights, and challenge themselves, if like looking at the last, let's say, quarter and so on, or the last year, how many of their decisions were actually based on the data that we collect. And we, like, companies pay so much on collecting it, on organizing that, on modeling that, and sometimes we need to remember that it's in mean to an end. Mean to an end, it's supposed to be a force multiplier for our decision making, for improving our KPIs.
Tom, I loved doing this deep dive on product analytics with you. Thank you so much for sharing your own insights.
Thank you so much for hosting me here.